5 years after returning to the original world, I was sent back again. My first child looked at me with red eyes. I had to win 10 gold medals to get you back. Dad, I can finally make up for the fatherly love that was missing. But I suddenly remembered how he once looked at an orphan by the roadside and said, "I really envy you, because you don't have a dad." I gently responded, "It's not something that can be made up for. I'm already someone else's father now." In the 5th year after leaving the system, I inexplicably found myself back here again. Before I could figure out why, a figure suddenly rushed heavily into my arms. "Dad," he choked up, "you finally come back." The girl in my arms was now tall enough to reach my shoulders. Sobbing softly, she seemed afraid that I might disappear again, her fingers tightly gripping the corner of my clothes. I looked at Liu Ruyan with a complicated expression, wiped away her tears, and proudly told me, "I won 10 gold medals to bring you back. Dad, I can finally make up for the fatherly love that was missing." Back then, I was at the peak of my life when I first arrived in this world. The system demanded that I conquer Liu Ruyan within 3 years. Eventually, Liu Ruyan and I got married, but she didn't love me. On our wedding night, she got drunk and made a phone call across the ocean to E2 Castle. "Just one word from you, and I'll get a divorce." Unfortunately, the other side rejected her. In the 2nd year of our marriage, we had Liu Ruyan. The system asked me if I wanted to return to the original world since the mission was complete. Does the host choose to return now? At that time, I had just become a father, and my heart was filled with tender love. I chose my child, but in doing so, I gave up all the children I had worked so hard to raise. As he grew up, he liked everyone in the family. His wealthy grandfather, his writer grandmother, his lawyer mother, everyone except me. When talking about me to his friends, he would say, "My dad is just a stay-at-home dad. He doesn't know anything. All he does is run around the house." It killed me inside. One day, we encountered an orphan begging for a living by the roadside. Liu Ruyan crouched down and tossed a few 100 yuan bills into his bowl. With an unbelievably sincere tone, she whispered, "I really envy you, because you don't have a dad to boss you around." And all of this was just because I didn't let her eat candy when she had a cavity that day. As she grew older, Liu Ruyan inherited her mother's intelligence, being clever since childhood. One day in her senior class, she made a mistake and ranked 2nd in the exam. After coming home, she used a fruit knife to deeply cut her arm. My heart ached as I bandaged her wound. While applying the medicine, she forcefully pushed me away. "Don't touch me. It's all your fault. I only ended up in 2nd place because of you. I want to bleed out the part of me that carries your loathsome genes. Why did you even marry Mom back then? If it wasn't for Uncle E2 Castle, I wouldn't want a father like you at all." At that moment, I felt nothing but coldness in my heart. That night, I told the system, "Let me go back. I don't want anything anymore." My thoughts were abruptly pulled back to the present. Liu Ruyan was looking at me with hopeful eyes. She pointed to the thick stack of certificates the bodyguard was holding and spoke with a hint of immense pride. "Dad, look. These are all the awards I've won. I didn't let you down, did I?" I looked at her with an indifferent expression. "No, you didn't. After all, children are easily pleased." A fleeting joy spread across her face. But then she heard the second half of my sentence. "Because from the day I left, I never had any expectations for you again." And I stared at the face that somewhat resembled Liu Ruyan's. "I won't be staying, nor will I make up for the fatherly love you missed out on. I'm already someone else's father now." After returning to the original world, I got married. I have a loving wife and an obedient, adorable son. The arrogance on Liu Ruyan's face instantly faded. Her face turned pale. "How is that possible? Aren't I your only child?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall. You must be lying to me. You loved mom so much, and you loved me too. How could you be with someone else? Why would a father like you be so heartless? She questioned, one sentence after another. Her tone and mannerisms were exactly like that woman's. Calmly, I pushed her hand away. I looked over at the Liu family's bodyguard standing nearby. Whose child is this? If she keeps bothering me, I'll have to call the police. Liu Ruoxu's face turned ashen in an instant. In the end, Liu Ruoxu still ordered the bodyguards to forcibly take me to the car. On the way, she sat tightly next to me. Dad, go see mom, won't you? She really misses you. She's been in worse and worse condition lately. She paused, then looked up at me with her small face. Anyway, you can't go back now. So from now on, we'll be a family of 3 again. Right? I quietly gazed out the window. I didn't feel like responding to her. The wind blew through the half-open car window. Liu Ruoxu's tone became a bit aggrieved. Dad, I really miss you. I won't ever call you dumb again. I don't want anyone else as my dad either. Please come back. Before she could finish speaking, the car had already stopped. Outside the window, the sign for Jiangcheng City's First People's Hospital stood out prominently. Liu Ruoxu, choking back tears, grabbed my hand. Please go see mom. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. Two bodyguards flanked me and dragged me into the hospital. When I pushed open the door to the room, a faint smell of disinfectant hit me, mixed with Liu Ruyan's favorite orchid scent. The hospital suite was a luxurious one. I turned left as I entered, and I saw Liu Ruyan. She had shed her old professional attire, now wearing a hospital gown, leaning against the headboard, quietly gazing out the window. Mom, Liu Ruoxu squeezed past me. Look who's here. Liu Ruyan remained in her position, unmoving. Her hoarse voice said, E2 Castle. Don't come here anymore. I don't want to see anyone. Her voice was raspy, a stark contrast to the cold and proud woman I remembered. Liu Ruoxu panicked, pulling me into the room. It's not Uncle E2 Castle. It's Dad. Before she could finish, Liu Ruyan slowly turned her head. 5 long years had passed, but she stared at me intensely, her eyes instantly turning red. For someone as proud as her, she didn't care at all as she tore out the four from her hand, stumbling as she ran toward me, forgetting even to wear her slippers. Dad, she gripped my hand tightly. Her palm was cold and dry. Is it really you? You really came back? In a daze. I recalled Liu Ruyan from 5 years ago, when I asked her why she was at E2 Castle's house the night before. She looked at me with immense pride. We were discussing business. You eat my food and drink my drinks. What right do you have to question me, Jiboter? Don't forget your place. With just a word from me, Mr. Liu's position can be replaced at any time. Snapping back to the present, I forcefully pushed her hand away. In a cold tone, I said, Miss Liu, are you misunderstanding something? It was your daughter who used the system's reward to bring me back. Ignoring the ashen expression on Liu Ruoxu's face beside me, I continued, I'm not staying. My wife and child are still waiting for me. The mother and daughter's faces turned pale in an instant. Liu Ruyan's figure swayed, staring at me in disbelief. You're married? Yes, I stated calmly, I'm married. And I even have a 4-year-old son. Liu Ruyan trembled, trying to speak several times. But in the end, she couldn't say a word. It was Liu Ruoxu who, holding back her tears, stubbornly lifted her face to look at me. It's okay. After all, Dad can't go back now. You can still only be my dad. She clenched her fists and softly asked, I don't blame you for leaving us back then. Dad, please stay. We can cure Mom's illness. We can still be a family of 3. Is that okay? Seeing that I remained silent, she thought I was hesitating. Cautiously, she came closer and tried to hold my hand. I'm still Dad's only treasure. Right, I pushed her hand away. I looked at this former child with disgust. No, she's not like you. As I pushed her away, I didn't notice Liu Ruoxu back a step. She bit her lips until they almost lost all color, and softly asked me, how is she different? She is our treasure. She is the child born out of love between her mother and me. Liu Ruoxu lowered her eyelashes. Then what about me? I calmly looked at her. You are not my child. Liu Ruoxu could no longer hold back and began to cry softly. Actually, Liu Ruoxu was once the child I held dearly in the palm of my hand. She was my first child, carrying countless of my hopes and love. When she was young, even if she scraped her hand, I would be heartbroken. Every little wish she casually mentioned, I would remember it deeply. I constantly tried to learn how to be a good father, but I became the person she grew to hate the most. She was the eldest granddaughter of the Liu family, raised in wealth and luxury from a young age. From childhood, she was instilled with all sorts of upper-class values by the Liu family, so she looked up to Liu Ruyan in everything. Subtly, she adopted Liu Ruyan's attitude towards me. She thought I wasn't smart enough, mocked me for giving up my job for her, and hated how I always tried to discipline her. When Liu Ruoxu was in kindergarten, there was a parent-child activity one time. The teacher asked her to choose a word to describe her dad from hero, prince, nanny. Without hesitation, she chose nanny. I looked at this former child with disgust. No, she's not like you. As I pushed her away, I didn't notice Liu Ruoxu stumble back a step. She bit her lips until they almost lost all color, and softly asked me, how is she different? She is the child born out of love between her mother and me. She is our treasure. Liu Ruoxu lowered her eyelashes. Then what about me? I calmly looked at her. You are not my child. Liu Ruoxu could no longer hold back and began to cry softly. Actually, Liu Ruoxu was once the child I held dearly in the palm of my hand. She was my first child, carrying countless of my hopes and love. When she was young, even if she scraped her hand, I would be heartbroken. Every little wish she casually mentioned, I would remember it deeply. I constantly tried to learn how to be a good father, but I became the person she grew to hate the most. She was the eldest granddaughter of the Liu family, raised in wealth and luxury from a young age. From childhood, she was instilled with all sorts of upper-class values by the Liu family, so she looked up to Liu Ruyan in everything. She thought I wasn't smart enough. Subtly, she adopted Liu Ruyan's attitude towards me, mocked me for giving up my job for her. When Liu Ruoxu was in kindergarten, and hated how I always tried to discipline her, there was a parent-child activity one time. Prince. The teacher asked her to choose a word to describe her dad from hero, nanny. Without hesitation, she chose nanny. And my dad is a free nanny. On her 7th birthday, her wish was to have no father. When I heard that wish, I cried for a long time. Eventually, I decided to grant her wish. I began to find ways to return home. Shenyachu and my son were still waiting for me at home. Finally, after countless attempts, I heard the familiar voice of the system in my mind. The host hesitated and asked, "Why are you back again?" I briefly explained the situation. The system was silent, then said, "That little ungrateful one. Serves her right not to have a father." There was something odd about how that sounded. Hold on, I'll apply to rebind the mission. If the mission succeeds, I'll request to send you back to the original world, and you won't be affected by this side anymore. Wait, I hesitated. This time, you're not going to make me conquer someone again, are you? Host, rest assured. The system's tone carried a hint of pride. I've now upgraded to the male-led system. I breathed a sigh of relief. However, after a night passed, the system excitedly informed me, this time, the task is to win first place in the National Robotics Competition. A fine male lead system indeed. But for the sake of going home, I agreed anyway. As I sat in the cafe, deep in thought, someone sat down across from Liu Ruyan. She had cut her hair short and was dressed in an all-white casual outfit. The clothes were ones I had bought for her years ago, but they had always been left to gather dust in her wardrobe. Today was the first time I saw her wear them, but Liu Ruyan had become much thinner. The clothes hung loosely on her. Not exactly ugly, but she could no longer fill them out. Liu Ruyan smiled at me. Got a moment? No! There was a teasing tone in her words, but I remained indifferent. Liu Ruyan silently slid a few sheets of paper across the table. On top was a medical report. Patient, Liu Ruyan, diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. She pressed her lips together as if remembering something. Her voice slightly hoarse. Back then, when I let you go, both Ruaksu and I regretted it. We really missed you. She gave a self-mocking smile, especially during the first month after you left. Everything was a mess. We hired 3 nannies, but the house never returned to its former orderliness. Ruaksu hated strangers touching her things. The organizing team rearranged the whole place, but I still couldn't find the clothes I wanted to wear. My appetite had already been spoiled by you. Enough! I cut off Liu Ruyan's endless recollections. Miss Liu, I don't have time to listen to your stories, and I'm not interested in your illness. Sunlight filtered through the glass window, making Liu Ruyan's complexion even paler. Her grip on the coffee cup tightened, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. Sorry, she forced a weak smile. I just wanted to say, Dad, can you come back? After you left, both Ruaksu and I really missed you. Ruaksu is still young. She desperately longs for a father's love. She paused, her voice choking slightly. After you left, I realized that I had already fallen in love with you. I found that I couldn't accept a life without years. Staring at the empty rooms and enduring sleepless nights alone have been unbearable. I could only turn to cigarettes and alcohol for relief. Liu Ruyan rarely spoke so much in one go. Choking up, she softly asked, I don't have much time left. Can you come back and stay with Ruaksu? And stay with me? Please. As she said this, she hurriedly handed me the remaining sheets of paper. This is my will. After I'm gone, everything I own will be left to you. I calmly finished the last stroke on my drawing, then glanced at her. Miss Liu, I won't be staying here. The string of zeros in your bank account, to me, is just a series of numbers. Liu Ruyan stared intently at my expression. Disappointment flashed in her eyes. So, are you planning to abandon your daughter again? Do you know how hard she's worked over the years just to see you? I couldn't help but laugh. Worked hard for what? Worked hard to drag me back from the world I finally returned to. To make up for the fatherly love she once scorned? Ruaksu really is just as selfish as both of you. As Liu Ruyan left, her steps were unsteady. The sunlight enveloped her frail figure, and the banyan tree at the door conveniently cast a shadow over her path. Her back looked desolate. I watched her through the glass window, suddenly remembering the first time I met Liu Ruyan. It was right after E2 Castle had broken up with her. On a stormy night, dripping down the edges, she had sent away her driver and bodyguards, crouching by the roadside to hold an umbrella over a litter of stray kittens. It was a foolish act, but there she was kneeling down, holding a large black umbrella. She stood slightly tilted to the right, her back perfectly straight, radiating a mix of pride and loneliness that created a striking contrast. The rain was blocked by the umbrella, blurring Liu Ruyan's delicate features. She gently stroked the kitten's fur. Have you been abandoned too? She used a 100 yuan bill to cradle the kitten, and as she was about to get into the car, she turned and saw me. So, she tossed the black Rolls-Royce umbrella to me. Don't catch a cold. Take care, Ahui. I remember thinking, this mission target seems quite interesting. Later, I tried my hardest to force my way into Liu Ruyan's life, doing everything I could to heal the wounds that E2 Castle had left on her already shattered heart. And indeed, Liu Ruyan eventually married me. On our wedding night, when Liu Ruyan, drunk, leaned in to kiss me, I gently tugged at the hem of her dress. Liu Ruyan, who am I? She smiled as she undid her wedding dress, leaning down with a playful smirk. Dad. G. Boda. That night, the swaying moonlight looked much like the dappled sunlight filtering through the gaps in the leaves today. But later that night when I woke up, I didn't find Liu Ruyan in bed. I found her in the garden to look for her, smoking a cigarette. She was quietly pleading with the person on the other end of the phone, E2 Castle. And I'll divorce him, okay? I don't know what E2 Castle said, but I knew she was turned down. That day, Liu Ruyan spent the entire night gazing at the moon. I lay awake in the courtyard, sleepless through the night. I no longer harbor. Just say the word. Any hopes for this marriage? All I wanted was to complete the system's task and go home. But no matter how well I treated Liu Ruyan, I could never move her. The mission progress never showed as successful. It wasn't until the day Liu Ruyan was born that the system finally informed me that the mission was complete. I could go home now. But as I held the child connected to me by blood, I knew I shouldn't let myself be tied down. Yet the moment that child, who hadn't even opened their eyes yet, miraculously grasped my finger, I couldn't help but soften. For the sake of my child, I chose to stay. But I never imagined that my own flesh and blood would one day become a dagger pointed. One day, while I was in the yard working on a robot design, I noticed a girl standing outside the door. Liu Ruyan didn't come in. She just stood there quietly watching me. Her gaze was somewhat timid, but mostly filled with a deliberate attempt to please. When she saw me look up, she carefully reached through the railing, handing over a thermos. Dad, I made chicken soup for you. Please try it. She stretched her arm out as far as she could, her wrist covered with two colorful band-aids. Noticing my gaze, she quickly pulled her hand back. It's nothing. I just burned myself while making the soup. She looked up at me. It's just a small injury. As long as Dad likes the soup, it's worth it. When I didn't respond, she retracted her hand and twisted open the thermos lid. I continued drawing. The aroma of the chicken soup wafted in the breeze, not even lifting my head as I said, "Burning yourself while making instant noodles, huh?" Liu Ruyan's smile froze on her face. After all, she's still just a child. No matter how mature she was for her age, being exposed so bluntly was hard to bear. She bit her lip, her tone aggrieved. I can't make chicken soup, but I didn't want the nanny to do it either. Even if it's just instant noodles. I cooked the seasoning packet myself. She seemed to grow more and more upset as she spoke. Don't you care at all about the burn on my arm? I thought when you came back, you'd realize how much you owed me and make it up to me twice over. But what did you do? You've ignored me all along, repeatedly telling me that I'm not your child anymore. Liu Ruyan's eyes reddened, and it was clear she was struggling to hold back tears. But her shoulders still trembled slightly. I'm your biological child. What right do you have to disown me? As she spoke, she forcefully pulled open the iron gate, stormed into the yard, and grabbed my sketchbook. Flipping through the pages one by one, all you do every day is draw those design plans, or sketch that little boy. Then, she snatched the phone from the table and turned on the screen, staring at it with jealousy in her eyes. Even the wallpaper is a picture of you three as a family. Have you ever thought about me and Mom? Do you know how much pain Mom is in every day while getting treatment? I quietly watched her finish speaking. Is it my fault your mom got sick? 5 years ago, I signed the divorce papers with Liu Ruyan, and I gave up custody of you. Back then, you tried to please E2 Castle to be your new dad, and even wrote a letter severing ties with me. Hearing me bring up the past, Liu Ruyan's face flushed bright red. She stiffened her neck and retorted, I was just a kid back then. I wrote it out of impulse, and it has no legal validity. I gently smoothed out the torn page from the sketchbook and calmly told her, but in my eyes, that agreement became valid. You came to me with an online template to sever ties, saying you envied other kids who didn't have a dad. Even your birthday wish was to have no father. Maybe 5 years have passed, and you've forgotten all those things you said. I handed her the crumpled paper, but the impact of those words remains forever. I picked up the drawing of my son that she had thrown to the ground and carefully put it away. On that paper, my son's smile was bright and pure. I couldn't help but smile along with him. I wonder how that mother and son are doing back home. Are they eating on time? Did my little foodie sneak some candy? Do they miss me? When I looked up, I saw Ruaksu staring at me with tear-filled eyes. Expressionless, yet big tears rolled down her cheeks. This child is actually very much like Liu Ruyan. Intelligent, but a complete mess emotionally. Her selfishness and self-centeredness ruin her relationships. She cried for a while, and when she realized I had no intention of comforting her, she finally began to slowly shuffle away. She took a few steps, then turned back, silently picking up the thermos from the ground, holding it close to her chest, and staggered out of the gate. In the afternoon, while reading, I suddenly received a call from an unknown number. A deep, aged voice spoke on the other end, one that felt somewhat familiar. "Mister," the voice said, "you finally came back." The overly formal tone of this Mr. greeting felt out of place. The smoking butler continued, "In truth, it's not my place to interfere in matters between you and Miss Liu, but I can't stand seeing her tormenting herself like this. Could you come to the hospital and visit her?" "No!" Miss Liu has refused treatment, and despite the doctor's orders, she drinks every day. Whenever she gets drunk, she keeps calling your name. Her health is deteriorating rapidly. Even when she manages to fall asleep, there are still tear stains at the corners of her eyes. To be honest, even an old man like me feels heartbroken watching her. The butler, who had served the Liu family for decades, had watched Liu Ruyan grow up. He choked up as he spoke. "You used to call me Uncle Chen, so I'm begging you as Uncle Chen. Please go see Miss Liu, will you?" I flipped through the pages of my book, ready to refuse. But then I heard Liu Ruyan's voice on the other end. "Uncle Chen, are you calling him?" She hoarsely shouted. "Who told you to call him?" A few seconds later, the phone fell silent. Then Liu Ruyan's voice came through. "I'm sorry. Uncle Chen just felt bad for me. So he contacted you without asking." She paused, then asked cautiously, "I know you hate me now, but in a few days it's Ruaksu's birthday. Could you be with her for it?" Afraid that I'd refuse, she quickly added, "In the 5 years since you left, every year her birthday wish has been for her dad to celebrate with her. She even dreams of you coming back." Her voice softened. "And so do I." At that moment, a gentle breeze swept through the courtyard. I closed the book in my hands and rested it on my knee, rubbing my aching temples. My words drifted away with the wind. With a cold, distant tone, "Miss Liu, how you and your daughter live has nothing to do with me. I won't come to see you, and I hope you won't bother me again. I'm busy getting home to see my wife and son." I hung up the phone, cutting off the sound of a sigh on the other end. Then I casually removed the SIM card and tossed it into the nearby trash can. My gaze fell on the calendar on my phone. There were still 2 months until the design competition. On the way, I encountered a stray cat, one that looked very much like the cat my son has at home, Huawa. It was a small black and white kitten. The kitten wasn't afraid of people, so I fed her. She walked up and affectionately rubbed against my hand, even rolling around at my feet. I suddenly froze, my eyes landing on the heart-shaped patch of black fur on her belly. My daughter's Huawa has the exact same patch in the same spot and size. I stood there, dazed for a long time, then hesitantly called out, "Huawa? Meow!" She softly mewed back and rubbed her fluffy little head against me. But in reality, Huawa at home is aloof, never paying me any attention. When she's in a bad mood, she even swats at me. I squatted there by the roadside, watching her for a long time. If I hadn't been inexplicably brought back here, I'd be home right now helping my son with his homework. Even though sometimes his silliness gives me a headache, he would still come running over to hug me. He softly says, "Dad, don't be mad." I'll memorize it right away. And then, once again, my heart softens. My wife's name is Shen Yuchu. She's a university professor. We love each other deeply. Once, there was a fire at home, and she stumbled, rushing to hold our son, while I soaked a blanket in water and tightly wrapped them both in it, shielding them as we made our way downstairs. My back was burned in the process. Shen Yuchu never explicitly said she loves me, but through the years of our marriage, her actions have been the most convincing proof. I brought the little stray cat home. Named her Huahua, she's very attached to me, always cuddling up and seeking attention. When I'm not busy drawing, I'm almost always focused on her, channeling all my homesickness into this little creature. One weekend, as I was playing ball with Huahua in the yard, someone showed up at the gate. A mother and daughter, both dressed in matching shirts, stood quietly outside watching me. Eventually, Liu Ruyan rang the doorbell through the iron fence. She pressed her lips together, her voice soft, "Sorry, but Ruaksu still wants to celebrate her birthday with you. If you're uncomfortable, we can stay outside and not come in. Is that okay?" Beside her, Liu Ruaksu looked at me with anticipation in her eyes. I didn't say anything, just lowered my head and continued playing with Huahua. The mother and daughter quickly took out the birthday cake, no longer concerned with formality. Placing the cake box directly on the ground outside the gate, Liu Ruaksu happily put on a birthday hat, counting each candle as she placed them on the cake. "Dad," she clung to the gate bars with both hands. She carefully asked me, "Can you say happy birthday to me?" I stayed silent for a long time, seeing the light slowly fade from her eyes. I finally whispered, "Happy birthday." I didn't look outside the gate. After she blew out the candles, I left. I was afraid I might soften. No matter how detached I feel, she's still my own flesh and blood. And in this way, Liu Ruaksu is very much like Liu Ruyan. She's skilled at playing the victim and knows exactly how to exploit others' compassion to achieve her goals. Outside the gate, Liu Ruyan began lighting the candles one by one. Liu Ruaksu glanced at her, then looked at me, bringing her hands together in prayer. She sincerely wished, "I hope Mom and Dad can get back together, so we can be a happy family forever." I couldn't help but frown. But just then, a gust of wind blew through, and in the very next moment, the strong flames on the candles were snuffed out. At the same time, the long silent system in my mind sneered, "Ungrateful brat, still dreaming of a happy family reunion." Outside, Liu Ruaksu stared at the extinguished candles, her expression extremely complicated. After a long silence, she suddenly grabbed the lighter from Liu Ruyan's hand, desperately trying to light the candles again, as if in a frenzy. She burned herself twice, but gritted her teeth and endured it. Her eyes reddened, but she held back her tears. The candles were lit once more, and she stared at the flickering flames, obsessively making the same wish again. "We will stay together as a family forever. I want him to be my dad and only mine, to cook just for me, to pick me up from school, to help only me with my studies." Liu Ruaksu choked out through gritted teeth. "He should only take care of me and Mom." Just as she finished speaking, the cat in my arms, Huahua, suddenly leapt out, nimbly squeezing through the fence, and pounced on the edge of the cake. The cake flipped over, sticky frosting covering Huahua from head to tail, but it also extinguished the candles once again. Liu Ruaksu's wish was interrupted yet again. Her expression shifted suddenly. She threw down the lighter and lunged forward, trying to strangle Huao's neck. But she was far too slow compared to Huahua, and not only did she fail to catch her, she got scratched across the back of her hand, leaving red marks. Liu Ruyan, worried, grabbed her wrist to check. "It's bleeding. We need to get you a rabies shot right away." But Liu Ruaksu angrily yanked her hand back. She struggled to push open the gate, running up to me in small steps. She held out her injured hand toward me. her tone full of grievance. Dad, your cat scratched me. It hurts so much, but I simply walked past her, picking up the little cat from the ground. How did you get covered in cake? Now you need another bath. As I turned to head back inside, Liu Ruyan couldn't hold back and called out, Dad, how can you be so heartless? Do you know how much she's been looking forward to this birthday? Even just sharing a piece of cake with you through the gate would make her happy. I didn't stop walking. If it were 5 years ago, maybe I would have softened and then allowed myself wield to be trapped by the emotional shackles these two women so skillfully. But after experiencing true love, I finally understood that real love is never about endless taking. I held Huawa as I walked toward the door, when suddenly Liu Ruoxu's voice rang out behind me. To you, am I really less important than an animal? Dad, how can you be so cruel? Do you know how I've lived these years without a father? How did I get through it? I turned around, looking at her expressionlessly. How did you get through it? Surrounded by several nannies, treated like a princess, living a lonely and self-centered life. After all these years, I once again spoke the name I painstakingly chose for her, but this time with cold detachment in my eyes. What you needed was never a father. What you wanted was a full-time caretaker, someone to monitor your every mood and sacrifice everything meticulously for you, a free nanny. I glanced at Liu Ruyan, whose face was just as grim as her daughter's. Even with your mother gravely ill, nearing death, your birthday wish was still about how I could take care of you, without a single thought for her. Not a single hope that she might get better soon. A sudden evening breeze swept through the courtyard, messing up Liu Ruoxu's slightly long hair and breaking down her frail posture. I turned and headed back inside, still holding Huawa close. The little one snuggled obediently in my arms, even licking my palm with her tiny tongue, as if trying to comfort me. Autumn was approaching, but the weather remained stifling. Since that birthday, it had been 3 days since Liu Ruoxu last came by. On the other hand, Liu Ruyan still came every day, but she never stepped inside either. She just stood outside the gate, watching me. When she couldn't hold on anymore, a bodyguard would wheel her over in a wheelchair. She would sit there in that chair, just staring at me, her gaze complicated and intense. But I carried on with my work as usual, never sparing her a glance. I never believed that affection, when it arrives late, counts as genuine love. True love never needs the bitterness of separation to make it real. In the years of my marriage with Liu Ruyan, I never felt her warmth or respect. She married me, but never loved me. She gave me the title of Mr. Liu, while comfortably accepting all the care I provided. She had chronic gastritis, but after all these years, she still didn't even know what medicine to take when her stomach hurt. She didn't know what foods she was allergic to, or how to quickly improve her mood when she was upset. All these tiny details, I remembered them all perfectly. But to Liu Ruyan back then, they were insignificant trifles. No matter how much I did, it never measured up to even a single cough from Itu Castle across the ocean. To this day, I still remember how Liu Ruyan looked on our wedding night, softly pleading into the phone. I remember how, on a drunken night, she forced herself on me, tearing at my clothes while murmuring Itu Castle's name, my disgusting display. I also remember how, after staying out all night, when I asked why she was at Itu Castle's house, she scolded me, looking down on me with disdain in her eyes. A person like that, what right does she have to come back now and act like she's deeply in love with me? That evening, as I was about to take Huawa for a walk, I saw that familiar figure outside the gate again. Liu Ruyan was sitting in her wheelchair, with 2 bodyguards standing a short distance behind her. The night breeze was chilly, and she huddled in her coat, seeming even thinner than before. When she saw me come out, her eyes brightened slightly. Dad, she called, but I walked right past her without a word. Her voice was hoarse, and she let out a bitter laugh. Actually, if Ruoxu and I hadn't messed up back then, we'd probably still be a happy family of 3 right now, wouldn't we? No one responded to her. She murmured to herself, or maybe even a family of 4. If ... If only dot. She choked on her words, her voice breaking as she asked. But by then, I had already walked out of the neighborhood with Huawei. The wind carried her words far away. In the end, she never managed to say what the if was. We're all adults here. She knows better than anyone else. That saying if only is the most foolish thing in the world. Robot design was my career in the original world, and also my passion. For the past few months, I've been preparing for this design competition. I can't afford to waste a single minute. I have to win, because I need to go home. On a day when the weather suddenly turned cold, Liu Ruyan didn't show up. She didn't come the following days either. I felt a sense of peace. But 3 days later, Liu Ruyan came. She was dressed lightly, stubbornly standing outside the gate, her hands gripping the fence tightly. "Dad, can you go see Mom?" She choked out, her eyes gradually turning red. "Mom, she's not going to make it." I didn't pause as I continued sweeping the yard. "Sorry, but I'm not a doctor. Could you just go see her for a moment, please? Mom keeps calling your name." A couple of days ago, she suddenly fell into a coma. And the first thing she asked when she woke up was, outside the iron gate. Liu Ruyan bit her lip hard and slowly knelt down. Without another word, she bowed 3 times. "Dad, I'm not asking you to reconcile anymore. Can you just go see her?" She put force into it, her forehead turning bright red. I looked at her with a complicated expression. After a long pause, I finally said, "All right." I followed Liu Ruyan to the hospital. When I saw Liu Ruyan lying in the hospital bed through the glass, I was momentarily taken aback. It was hard to reconcile the confident and radiant woman I remembered with the frail, withered patient clinging to life. Liu Ruyan pushed the door open, ran to the bedside, and gently shook her mother. "Mom, Dad is here." Liu Ruyan slowly turned her head. In just a few days, she had grown much more gaunt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and even her lips were tinged with a bluish hue. Her gaze struggled to find me, and she smiled weakly. "I must look terrible, right?" I was silent for 2 seconds, then bluntly replied, "A bit." Liu Ruyan didn't get angry. She just gave a faint smile. "These days, I've been thinking a lot about the past, mostly about regrets. I often wondered too, if back then Ruyan and I had appreciated your worth, maybe we'd be really happy now." She paused for a moment, her eyes drifting to the phone in my hand. The screen was lit up, showing a picture of me, my wife, and my son, our family of 3. In Liu Ruyan's eyes, there was undisguised envy. She carefully studied the family photo on the screen until the screen went dark. Her eyes gradually reddened. I spent my whole life chasing what I had already lost, never treasuring those right in front of me. "Dad, I regret it so much. Truly, I really do love you." I didn't want to hear her confession, so I cut her off. "Enough! It's all in the past." The light in Liu Ruyan's eyes dimmed. "Yes, it's all in the past." After a brief silence, Liu Ruyan softly said, "I don't have much time left. I'm just worried about Ruyan. She's still so young, without a mother." She glanced at me and continued, "and without a father either. What will she do?" Liu Ruyan was also looking at me, her eyes red, saying nothing, but the grievance in her eyes was almost overflowing. The child I once cradled with so much care was now silently showing her hurt, but I no longer felt any pity. I calmly replied, "She will still be the Liu family's little princess, protected by the Liu family, living a life of luxury." Even if Liu Ruyan is no longer the one at the helm, Liu Ruyan is destined to have a privileged life. There's nothing to feel sorry about. Beside the bed, Liu Ruyan's hand trembled as she gripped the edge of the bed. She lifted her head as if wanting to say something to me. But in the end, she didn't utter a single word. With the competition approaching, I made sure Huawei was settled, booked a car to the airport, and prepared to fly to another city for the contest. But on the way, I received a call from Liu Ruyan. She was crying. In a panicked voice, she cried, "Dad, please hurry to the hospital. She's not going to make it. What should I do? I'm about to lose my mom. You were her husband after all. Can you at least come to see her off? She was sobbing uncontrollably, but I just quietly said, your grandfather will take care of your mom's matters. I'm not going. After a pause, I finally added, take care of yourself from now on. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Liu Ruyan suddenly choked up and asked, Dad, you're still going to the competition, right? You're still leaving, aren't you? I was shocked that she knew about my task. But before I could react, Liu Ruyan softly continued, if you don't win first place, you won't be able to go back, right? With that, she dropped the phone and the call ended. On the way to the airport, my hands and feet turned icy cold. I kept calling out to the system in my mind, asking it what was going on. The system admitted it didn't know either. Don't worry, host. I'll go check immediately. For the rest of the trip, the system stayed completely silent. It wasn't until my plane reached cruising altitude that the system finally responded. Host, I just detected that Liu Ruyan has been bound to a new mission. She'll be competing in a national math competition for children. If she wins, the system hesitated. Her reward will be that you stay. As the plane smoothly descended, I immediately hired temporary bodyguards. I had to ensure that no one interfered with my journey to the competition. I couldn't let anyone stop me from getting back home. Thankfully, everything went smoothly. The competition and returning to the city on the day I came back. It just so happened to be the day of Liu Ruyan's math competition. However, when I went to pick up Huala from the pet store, I saw Liu Ruyan outside the gate. She hadn't gone to the competition. The sky was gloomy. Rain hadn't started yet, but the clouds were rumbling with thunder. She was wearing a thin shirt, squatting at the entrance, curled up into a small ball, like an abandoned puppy. When she heard my footsteps, Liu Ruyan slowly lifted her head, revealing a tear-streaked, pale face. Dad, she stood up and ran toward me, but then stopped halfway, awkwardly, timidly freezing in place, just staring at me. She said, Mom's gone. She probably regretted it, not seeing you one last time. I remained silent. Liu Ruyan clenched the hem of her shirt tightly, and then softly whispered, actually, I was given a new system mission. If I went to the math competition and took first place, I could make sure Dad would stay forever. Her eyes were red, her voice filled with bitterness. I would have definitely gotten first place at that competition, but before Mom passed, she had me locked up and only let me out after the competition was over. Liu Ruyan forced a laugh, tears falling heavily down her face. She didn't want me to keep you here. She said I'm just as selfish as her. She said I never considered your feelings, but I just wanted to be like other kids and have a dad who cares about me too. Is that too much to ask? She cried as she said, Mom told me that even if I forced you to stay, you would never love me again. Is that true? I looked at her coldly. It is. Liu Ruyan broke down into sobs, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. She choked several times, coughing violently, but I didn't go over to pat her back. After a long time, Liu Ruyan slowly calmed down. Raindrops began to fall from the sky,